The trip to the northern mountains had felt like an escape long before it even began. Maybe because life at home had become a routine of silence, two people living together but barely speaking, barely looking, barely caring. My relationship had turned into a dull, faded painting, and most days I found myself staring at walls instead of the person I was supposed to love. So when my boss mentioned that we needed to go on a 2-day work retreat for a project, I said yes before I even fully understood what the project was. I just needed air, cold mountain air, quiet air, any air that didn't taste like disappointment. My boss wasn't the type you easily ignored. Calm, observant, never raising his voice, but always giving it enough weight that you felt heard whenever he spoke. He treated everyone with respect, but for reasons I didn't understand, he always treated me a little differently, never crossing a line, never inappropriate, just present. More present than the person waiting for me at home ever was. We left early in the morning, the sky still half asleep, roads empty except for trucks climbing slowly toward the hills. The car heater hummed softly while the world outside grew greener, wider, quieter. For the first hour, neither of us spoke much, just music filling the silence, but slowly, as sunlight started reaching through the clouds, the conversations came naturally. He asked if I'd been tired lately, if work had been overwhelming, if something was weighing on my mind. The softness in his voice made it hard to hide the truth. I tried brushing it off, but he gave me that look, the kind that tells you he already knows you're lying. Just feel a little distant from everything, I finally said. He didn't press for details. He didn't need to. Sometimes silence is more comforting than answers. By midday we were winding through steep cliffs, pine forests on either side, and the air carried the clean scent you only smell in high places. When we reached the lodge, it felt like we had stepped out of the world and into a pocket of stillness. A wooden cabin, a stone pathway, a balcony facing endless mountains, everything so peaceful it almost hurt to look at. Inside, the fireplace had been left ready with dry wood, and the caretaker handed us keys before disappearing down the hill. For a moment, it felt like the entire world consisted of just two people and a quiet wooden room. I set my bag near the corner and walked to the balcony, letting the cold breeze brush against my face. My boss joined me, standing close but not too close, just enough that I could feel the shared quiet between us. "You look lighter already," he said. Maybe I needed this more than I realized. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the far mountains, though I knew he'd been studying me all morning, seeing things I didn't want noticed. That was the thing about him, he noticed everything. As the day stretched on, we discussed the project, made notes, argued gently about ideas, and then laughed at how ridiculous some proposals had been. There was something easy about talking to him, something natural in the way our conversations flowed. He never dismissed my opinions, never made me feel small. With him, I felt like someone who mattered. Near evening, as the temperature dropped sharply, we lit the fireplace. The warm glow filled the room, flickering over wooden walls and casting soft shadows. It was the kind of atmosphere that could make anyone feel vulnerable. Or maybe it was just me. I caught him watching me once, only once, and he looked away so quickly that I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. But the moment lingered in my mind, stirring something I didn't want to name. After dinner, the wind outside grew stronger, the mountains turning darker, colder. My boss handed me a cup of warm tea, his fingers brushing mine for a second longer than necessary. It was nothing, or maybe it was everything. Even the smallest touch felt like a spark in a place where warmth had been missing for a long time. "You seem lost in thought," he said. "Just thinking about things I've ignored for too long," I replied. He didn't push. He never did. He just sat beside the fire, his presence steady, silent, comforting in a way that made my chest feel too full. The sound of wind outside and the soft crackling of fire created a cocoon where everything felt unreal, dangerously safe, dangerously calm. As night settled completely and the world outside vanished into shadows, I realized something I had been trying to avoid. I wasn't just escaping my home. I was escaping towards something, or someone, I shouldn't be drawn to. And yet the pull was there, strong and undeniable. When he finally said, "Get some rest, it's going to be a long day tomorrow," his voice held a warmth that stayed with me long after I stepped into my room. That night, lying in the quiet of the cabin, I kept replaying every moment of the day, every look, every accidental touch, every unspoken thing hanging in the space between us. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. The night had been colder than I expected. Even under the heavy blanket, I kept waking up, hearing the wind scraping against the wooden walls. But each time I opened my eyes, one thought returned like a whisper: the way he had looked at me near the fire, the warmth in his voice when he told me to rest, the softness that felt too intentional to ignore. I told myself not to overthink it. I told myself it was just exhaustion, just imagination. But it didn't feel like imagination. By early morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. I stepped out into the corridor and saw him standing near the balcony, hands wrapped around a steaming cup. He turned when he heard me and smiled, small, quiet, genuine. The kind of smile that settles into your chest and stays there. "Morning," he said. "Did you sleep?" "Not much," I admitted. "Thinking too much again?" I shrugged, and he didn't need more than that. He simply stepped aside, letting me stand beside him. The mountains stretched endlessly, sunlight cutting through the clouds in gentle rays. For a long moment, we didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence felt like a conversation on its own. After breakfast, we decided to take a walk through one of the trails that started behind the lodge. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of pine and wet earth. Birds perched on branches, the snow on the peaks glowing softly under the sun. It should have been an ordinary walk, but everything felt charged, as if the world around us had slowed down just so we could hear our own footsteps. He walked beside me, matching my pace, sometimes close enough that our arms brushed. Each accidental touch sent an unreasonable warmth through me. I tried to focus on the scenery, the trees, the sound of leaves crunching under our shoes, but the awareness of him was impossible to escape. At one point, he stopped and looked at the valley below. "You ever feel like something in your life ended without you noticing?" he asked, not looking at me. "Like one day you woke up, and the person you used to be wasn't there anymore." The words hit deeper than I expected. It felt like he was speaking for both of us. "I feel that way all the time," I said quietly. He turned, and for once, he didn't try to hide the softness in his eyes. "You shouldn't. You deserve more than just surviving every day." The wind brushed through the trees, and I suddenly felt exposed, not physically, but emotionally. Seen in a way I hadn't been in years. I looked away, trying to steady my breathing, because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. He understood me. In ways no one else did. In ways my partner back home had long stopped trying to. We continued walking until the sky began to thicken again, promising more rain. By the time we reached the cabin, the clouds had turned a heavy shade of gray. Inside, the lodge felt warmer than before, maybe because the two of us were no longer pretending not to notice the tension between us. When afternoon turned darker, the electricity flickered once before going off completely. Rain hammered the roof, and thunder rumbled deep in the distance. I lit a few candles while he set wood into the fireplace. The room glowed softly again, shadows dancing on the walls like the night before. He sat across from me, hands clasped, expression calm but unreadable. "You seem quieter today," he said. "Just thinking. You said that yesterday," he replied gently. "You know, you don't always have to carry everything alone." Something in his tone tugged at something deep inside me. A tightness I had ignored for too long loosened, and before I knew it, I was telling him things I had kept buried, about feeling invisible at home, about arguments that never ended, about love that had faded without us noticing. He listened the way a person listens when they actually care. No interruptions, no judgment, only steady attention. "I'm sorry," he said softly when I finished. "You deserve to feel wanted. You deserve to feel appreciated." His words lingered in the air between us, warm and dangerous. I looked at him, and the quiet intensity in his eyes made my pulse quicken. It wasn't desire, it was recognition. Two people seeing each other's wounds and wanting to soften them. The storm outside grew louder, rain hitting the windows like restless fingers. The cabin felt smaller, the air thicker, as if the walls were pushing us closer. He leaned forward slightly, not touching me, not even reaching out, just shortening the space between us. "I don't want to say anything that crosses a line," he murmured. "But I need you to know that you matter. More than you think." My throat tightened. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I simply nodded. His gaze softened even further, and for a moment, the storm didn't exist, the world didn't exist, only the quiet warmth between us. He didn't move closer after that. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. The things we didn't say spoke louder than anything we could have said. Later that night, When the thunder shook the windows, he looked at me with a mix of concern and affection and said, "You can sit here if it helps you feel safe." And somehow, without anything crossing a boundary, I felt safer than I had in years. The storm eased sometime during the night, but I didn't sleep much. The soft glow of the fireplace, the faint shadows dancing across the wooden walls, and the quiet presence of my boss sitting a few feet away, all of it formed a strange kind of comfort I hadn't felt in years. I watched the flames flicker until my eyelids grew heavy, and only then did I return to my room. But sleep never fully came. My mind kept circling the same thoughts, the same moments, the same warm silence we shared. By morning, the sky was a dull silver, still heavy with clouds but calm enough to step outside. When I opened my door, I saw him in the living area, sipping tea, his expression tired in a way that didn't seem physical. He looked up the second he noticed me. "Rough night?" he asked softly. "A bit." His eyes held mine longer than they should have, as if he was searching for answers I didn't know how to give. I looked away, pretending to focus on the steam rising from the kettle, but I could feel his gaze lingering, warm and thoughtful. We prepared for the day quietly, speaking only when necessary. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was something else, careful, loaded, almost fragile, as if one wrong word would break everything we were pretending not to feel. Around mid-morning, the clouds parted slightly, letting a wash of pale sunlight spill across the valley. He suggested we go for a short hike before the weather turned again. I nodded, needing the clarity of fresh air, needing space to think, though I didn't know whether that space would mend the confusion inside me or make it worse. The trail was muddy from last night's rain, but the forest smelled clean, alive. We walked slowly, stepping over wet stones, brushing past damp branches. He kept close enough to steady me when the ground grew uneven, but far enough that it didn't feel inappropriate. Yet somehow, even that distance felt like a thread pulling us together. Halfway up the trail, my phone buzzed. I already knew who it was. I hesitated before pulling it from my pocket. The message was short, blunt, emotionless, like most conversations had been recently. A reminder about something mundane, something insignificant, but written in a tone that made my chest tighten. Everything about home felt cold in comparison to the warmth of the last 24 hours. "You okay?" he asked. I must have gone too quiet, because his voice was softer than usual, cautious but concerned. "It's nothing," I said. But my voice cracked slightly, betraying me. He stepped a little closer, not touching me, just waiting. "You don't have to pretend with me." I looked down at the phone in my hand, the message glowing dimly on the screen. "It just feels like I'm invisible," I whispered. "Like nothing I do matters." He exhaled slowly, the sound heavy with understanding. "You're not invisible," he said. "Not to me." The words hit deeper than I expected. Something in me loosened, something I'd held tight for far too long. Before I realized it, my eyes were burning. I turned away quickly, embarrassed, but he was already close enough to sense the shift. "Hey," he said gently. I didn't mean to break. I didn't plan for the sudden wave of emotion that pulled my breath out of my chest. But standing on that quiet trail, surrounded by pine trees and cold air and the steady presence of someone who actually saw me, it all became too much. He didn't ask questions. He didn't reach out suddenly. He only moved a little closer, enough that I could feel his warmth, enough that I knew he was there, anchoring me. When I finally let out the breath I'd been holding, he placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, careful, respectful, but steady enough that I didn't fall apart entirely. "You don't deserve to feel alone," he murmured. "Not like this." His touch was gentle, not demanding, not suggestive, just comforting. I wasn't thinking about infidelity or consequences or decisions. I was thinking about how long it had been since anyone held me with kindness. I closed my eyes for a moment, just breathing, just letting myself exist without apology. When I opened them again, he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't interpret, part concern, part affection, part something he was clearly trying hard to hide. "We should head back," he said quietly. "Looks like it might rain again." We walked down the trail slowly, not talking much, but something between us had changed. Something unspoken had crossed from possibility into reality. Not through actions, but through understanding, through the kind of closeness you can't deny once you've felt it. By the time we reached the cabin, the sky had darkened again. Wind rattled the windows, and thunder grumbled in the distance. The air inside the lodge felt heavier than before, charged with everything neither of us dared to say. He set wood in the fireplace while I lit the candles again. When our eyes met across the room, there was a softness there, an acknowledgement of the moment on the trail, a silent agreement that we had stepped into a place we couldn't easily step back from. He sat down near the fire, his posture calm but his expression filled with something fragile and real. "If you ever feel alone tonight," he said quietly, "I'm here." It wasn't a line. It wasn't an invitation. It was simply truth, gentle, sincere, and more powerful than anything else he could have said. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone at all. The final night in the mountains was quieter than I expected. The storm had passed entirely, leaving a sky full of stars reflected across the icy peaks. The lodge, usually lively with the creaks of wood and the occasional gust of wind, now felt like our own private world, suspended in time. I sat near the fireplace, trying to focus on the crackling flames, but my thoughts kept drifting to the trail earlier that day, to his touch, his words, and the way he had listened without judgment. He entered the room carrying a cup of tea, offering it silently. I nodded in thanks. The gesture, small as it was, carried more warmth than anything I could recall experiencing recently. We didn't speak at first. Words seemed unnecessary. The silence itself felt like understanding, like acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us over the last 2 days. Finally, he broke it. "This trip, it's been a lot," he said softly. "I hope you know that whatever happens after we leave this place, you deserve to take care of yourself. Your heart deserves that." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. My heart, which had been so numb and closed off, felt raw, exposed, and more alive than it had in years. I realized that this trip had stirred something powerful inside me, not lust, not mere attraction, but recognition. Recognition that I had been surviving, not living. That someone could see me fully, and it was terrifying and wonderful all at once. I know," I whispered, unable to meet his gaze for more than a moment. I don't know how to handle all of this." "You don't have to handle it alone," he replied. "Just, don't ignore it. Don't ignore yourself." I looked at him, really looked, and saw sincerity, concern, and something gentle I wasn't prepared to name. The firelight reflected in his eyes, softening every hard edge, and for a moment, I almost wanted to tell him everything. But I didn't. I simply nodded, letting the silence carry the unspoken understanding. We spent the next hour in quiet companionship, sitting near the fire, watching the flames dance. Neither of us reached for more than shared warmth, yet the closeness itself was electric. It was a moment of clarity, a moment of choice, a moment where the boundaries of desire and respect merged into a fragile, unspoken promise to care without overstepping, to recognize the pull without giving in completely. The next morning, we packed and prepared to leave. The air outside was crisp and clean, the mountains stretching endlessly before us. Each step toward the car was heavy, weighted with reflection. The retreat was over, but the effect it had on me was far from done. Before we left the lodge, he turned to me. "Take your time figuring things out. Don't rush. And remember, you deserve happiness, even if it's complicated." I nodded again, words failing me. There was gratitude, there was guilt, there was something tender and lingering in my chest I couldn't fully name. I understood now that this trip had changed me, had reminded me that love and attention weren't to be taken for granted, and that emotional connection mattered as much as presence, if not more. The drive back was quiet, a reflective silence hanging between us. The mountains faded into rolling hills, and I could feel my thoughts drifting toward home, toward the life I had left behind, toward the choices I had ignored for far too long. Yet, unlike before, I carried clarity with me. I knew I had to face my life honestly, to reevaluate what mattered, to address the emotional gaps I had been living with. Not out of fear, not out of guilt, but out of recognition of my own worth. When we finally stopped near the town, he glanced at me one last time, his expression unreadable yet soft. "Whatever you decide," he said, "make sure it's what you truly need." I stepped out of the car and looked back at him. The moment stretched long, a quiet acknowledgement of everything we had shared and everything we hadn't. There was no promise, no pressure, just understanding. Then he drove away, leaving me standing there, facing the road ahead, the mountains behind, and a heart fuller, heavier, and wiser than it had been in years. I realized that sometimes trips don't just change scenery, they change perspectives. They force you to confront what's been missing, what's been overlooked, and what you've been too afraid to admit to yourself. And sometimes, they introduce you to someone who makes you see it all with startling clarity. As I started the walk home, I felt a strange combination of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the fleeting nature of the connection, for the impossibility of fully exploring it, and gratitude for having felt it at all. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive, truly seen, and ready, finally ready, to make the difficult choices that life required. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I understood that the most important journey wasn't the one across mountains or valleys. It was the journey within, toward honesty, toward courage, and toward the fragile, unshakable truth of one's own heart.